Welcome, investigator. Evil is on the rise. Crime is escalating. Our mission is to eliminate the crime by exposing evil, examine why it manifests, and highlight the brave souls that confront it every day. Join us as we work together to bring justice to every victim. Welcome to All Things Crime. Here's your host, Jared Bradley.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of All Things Crime. This is Jared, your host. I am excited to be here and just have to let you know that our sponsor for this half hour is MVAC Systems. MVAC is a wet vacuum DNA collection system, and it's our primary supporter. And if you have any trouble getting a DNA profile, then the MVAC is the way you want to go. So call MVAC, either go to www.m-vac.com, or you can call the office at 801-523-3962. And I also want to thank our guest today, Tom Myers. This guy, not only is he a former FBI ERT leader, CSI extraordinaire, but he's also a Ranger and served in the U.S. Army. So we're going to get all that story, and I'll tell you what, Rangers lead the way, right, Tom?
Rangers lead the way.
Amen,
Never
brother.
forget it. Yeah. Good to be here, Jared. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you too, man. I'm finally got you on here, and I'm excited to talk about this. So one of the things that really kind of pulled the trigger for me is I saw a post, and I can't remember what platform is on. I mean, we're connected in so many different ways. It's it's awesome, but got to keep in touch with all your law enforcement and Army buddies, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So, but also, one of the things you said was, being able to interview people is the key, one of the keys to solving cases and, solving a lot of these crimes out there and, getting, they have whole shows about it, the 48 hours and, or another next 48 hours, or whatever the title of it is. But, that's one of the things that I know you were expert at. But there's tons of stuff that you did throughout your career. So why don't we start, I think, with why you got into law enforcement. I mean, it's obvious why you went into the Army and became a Rangers, because you're a stud. But other than that, what do you think, man? What inspired you to get into law enforcement?
Right, expert, like you said, expert's anybody from out of town. So, right, I meet the requirement then. And what inspired me to get into law enforcement? So my parents were both in it. My mom was a crime scene technician for almost 30 years, and she would bring her home or work home with her, and I would get to see all the gore and everything else. And my dad was an agent for a few years and a reserve police officer, and worked in security as well. And I've got family all in law enforcement. So as somebody jokingly said, one of the old time cops, I never had a chance. So it's kind of all I know. And yeah, my mom was in forensics, and I got into it many years before CSI even came on ago, and worked my way through the different processes. I guess I'm a bit of a scientist, frustrated scientist, or would-be scientist at heart. And that sort of led the way as a police officer before, in between careers, before I became an FBI agent. And that's what I did, was forensics first, and kept doing that same thing as a detective, and then got on with the FBI for the next 25 years.
Awesome. And I have to let everybody know, that I know there's a lot of things going on with the FBI right now that some of the listeners may not really agree with, but Tom's one of the good guys. And I'll tell you what, right now, the vast majority of the agents that I've met are people that I'd put my life in their hands, and Tom is definitely one of them. So I appreciate everything that you did for the country, Tom, and I know you did it right. So when where you started CSI was down in South Florida, right?
Right, a small police department there in South Florida. Yep, and the luxury, because it was small, to sort of work my way right into it, and it wasn't as parochial as some of the bigger agencies, so I was able to test a few things. And then I had the ins with my mom working nearby, of course, in the police department. And then the sheriff's office down that way was extremely good, very, very good. In fact, all these years later, probably the best I've ever seen. And I was able to work with them a bit and do a brief internship with them. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, in fact, Stuart Mosher and all the other boys there at, I shouldn't just say boys, that's just kind of a general term, but all the folks there at
Broward
County are just amazing. So still keep
my Jedi masters. So Obi-Wan Kenobi, Stuart Mosher.
Yeah. And now that Stuart's retired, I'll tell you some of the guys that are coming in behind him that are really picking up the ball and running with it, not only in their own research, but also in developing new techniques to get, DNA off of shell casings and all sorts of crazy stuff that those guys are doing down there all the time. So, yeah, it's a good bunch of people to be hooked up with if you're in forensics. So,
well, you can tell the agencies that are really cutting edge because they embrace the technology, and of course, there's a bit of the funding comes faster with discretionary funds from a sheriff versus a bigger government. But very cutting edge, and they're embracing technology, and they were doing it years ago. Argon lasers, unheard of back in the early 90s.
Yeah. So some of the technologies that you saw come out during your career, what are some of the major ones?
Let's see. So, right, the argon laser, and then when switching from the police department to the FBI, it's very formalized, very parochial, and they have certain ways of doing it to protect the integrity of how they investigate and how the lab works. Lots of free flowing as a police officer, things move very, very fast, and it's different. I'll just say it's different. Let's see, the technology, certainly working our way backwards. The genetic investigative genealogy is got to be number one in the past 100 years, 50 years, 100 years. MBEX right up there, number two, probably, just because, you're pulling DNA off of porous items and getting hits that are, unheard of. The next generation identification, the computer program that branched off of APHIS is getting a lot of hits these days. The computers, I'm trying to think my way through this. The databasing is just stunningly good. Things are getting solved just by people looking at public records and making comparisons.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. There's, I think also, one of the positives that did come out of like the crime shows like CSI when they came on is there's a whole, I don't want to say society out there, but there's a massive group of people now that are just almost like crime sleuths, and they just love it. They go to CrimeCon, which is a big conference that I've started going to, and especially with a podcast, it makes total sense. But also, there's just things that they pick up. And Cheryl McCollum is talking about this all the time. She's like, nobody can have all of the information and all of the expertise and everything. And it's just impossible. It's just way too complicated. There's no such thing anymore as, as far as like Sherlock Holmes types, where one guy can solve a case. And nowadays it takes a huge team effort and a lot of times even multi-agencies, but being able to understand, and I think this is actually a key to every detective that's out there, is being the detective. Yes, you're in charge, but you're kind of the quarterback and you're part of the team. You just got to lead the investigation. But the most important thing I've found for detectives is to know when to call in people with certain expertise to help you with a case, and understanding, technologies like what you're talking about, but also even just saying, hey, you know what? I don't know what I'm looking at. And it's time to call in somebody like Dr. Lee Meller, or, something like that, where they have an expertise in serial killings or, forensics genealogy, all of that kind of stuff. It's like there's so many people out there that can help. And one of the big cases that that the MVAC was just involved with, there was a lady in California that matched a picture that was released from a Utah agency with a picture that was released from I think it's it's in Ohio. I can't remember the exact agency now, but they released them within about 7 days of each other. This lady in California saw the two on the internet, matched them up, called up the agency and said, "Hey, I think I know who your Jane Doe victim is."
Awesome. Great.
Yeah, it's just crazy. Yeah. So there's all sorts of stuff out there, and
when I was coming up, solving a cold case I don't even think I heard of one unless somebody walked in and confessed. Very rare did it happen. And a few more things came to mind when you said that. I think it's called Mission with a Purpose. I apologize if I screwed that up for these guys, but there's the divers that go out and they look at casework, and man, they're killing it out there. They've got to be over 30. We started databasing the genetic investigative genealogy when it first broke after GSK Golden State Killer, and knew this was an awesome investigative tool. And we went from that one, Bear Brook in Delaware right away, and then it was 4. Soon we were up to 8, and then now it's expected. That's why I see a resurgence going back to MVAC, because the low-hanging fruit is about to be exhausted. All the expectations on these cases that have stuff sitting in the lockers and evidence, and they know it. Now they got to go back and look at stuff where those skin cells is trapped into rope, clothing, whatever porous objects are out there. And that's going to be the next phase and next wave of it. It's going to overwhelm them. And it has overwhelmed a lot of the bench workers, the DNA bench workers, because they're getting so many hits. But that's where the private companies come in, and they're doing a good job taking up the slack. Othram is killing it. I don't want to just slight anybody else, but I know with them, let me tell you, a civilian, Ellen Leach in Mississippi, she is killing it. She's got 8 solved herself, just a civilian working it. And that's, she databases and runs a website herself. So as example, just citizen or journalism at its best. Investigative sleuth, like you said, armchair sleuth, maybe. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, there's people that, just because they have a different perspective, that alone may be the primary reason that that it goes a different direction. And who knows? It's one of those where having multiple people look at something. The worst case is you're exactly where you are right now, and the best case is you solve it. And I just think it's kind of sad when you hear sometimes when people are like, I have one swab left of, the evidence that we took. I just don't want to send it to the lab because, then I won't have anything to do. It's like, well, what if that one swab solves your case?
Right. Yeah. And it's a tough call. I don't want to, it's a tough call because you use it and the technology exists in 6 months and you just consumed that last swab, and boy, there's good, interesting times. And I'll add another thing. Gary Childs out of Baltimore on the Keepers, stunningly good, probably 50 years of investigative experience. He's retired and still living in Maryland. But with that, not only comes the experience, but that historical knowledge. So he remembers that all the way back. And you just simply can't capture everything in investigative notes. Dave Davis and the guys over in Montgomery County that solved the Lyon sisters kidnapping. It's stunningly good work. It was staring at them. You just had to go back through it and database and all, catch all that material. It was in The Last Stone by Mark Bowden, I believe is what the name of the book was. But exceptional casework right there, and what those guys were doing. Just close to me in Maryland, what I could say. But they have the historical, and when you go back to it, allegiances change. The people who were threatening or terrorizing the witnesses that were around that are gone, or now they feel safer, and information is shared so much more readily. And so you could have something be solved in the next jurisdiction, and you just pick it up in the newspaper. And I just pushed out to somebody on Facebook. You may have seen it, but they solved the murder of a police officer 50 years ago, I think it was, in Montgomery County. And my inability to articulate that right just tells you how many good things are happening.
So tell us maybe some details about one of those cases that you thought was such extraordinary investigative work.
Well, it's in the book, The Last Stone, Mark Bowden, Black Hawk Down author. And I got a small piece of it towards the end. And in fact, we debated using MVAC on that case, but a strong part of it, and by the way, I should caveat this is all out open source right now. It's in the book. The photos are in the book and everything else. But inside that book right there, those guys went back through the casework going all the way back to day one when the 2 little girls were kidnapped from the mall, and mid 70s. And they tracked it all the way back, and they tracked everybody's allegiances. And of course, leopards don't change their spots. And a lot of these things are very solvable simply by looking at who your involvees are in the case. And when you see somebody's got a criminal history for pled down to aggravated assault or criminal mischief or some kind of minor charge, and you look a little bit deeper, there's a sex charge in there. And that's exactly what happened. These guys worked it and worked it and worked until they broke them. And, Bowden calls it a masterpiece of criminal investigative work. But yeah, and the luminol lit up in the basement 50 years later. You can't get better than that.
So I'm just assuming then that the two girls were kidnapped from the mall. They took them to a house.
Yeah. Right. So forgive my trepidation on this because the case is closed, but it's not mine really to speak about. I had a very small part of it. And so that caveat being there, that's what happened is they were kidnapped, they were murdered inside the house. And what the detectives believed were the voids in the area where this horrible deed happened, meaning there was a substrate there, meaning wood or chopping material or something like that. It stood up to what they thought happened and everything else. And we had been back and forth in a support role, and eventually they pinned down who the person is, and he's serving life down in Virginia. Case in chief's in Virginia. They transported the girls down to Virginia and burned them up several times and over several days, and that's the end of the story. Yeah.
Wow. So
horrible.
Ultimately, what do you feel solved the case?
Okay, so time solved it for sure, because as time goes on, you have your offenders. They don't change. Sex offenders don't change, and as time went on, you could see the evolution of it, and the subject or suspect had been engaged in that for a long time. So, of course, it all makes sense when you look back on it, but you don't at the time. You can't pick that off. The databasing certainly helps. The ability now to grab information so quickly and identify people and get criminal histories is just stunningly good right now, and identify where people are at. This precedes really cell phone tracking. What else is it? Improved roads. You're able to get and communicate with police officers. I mean, I'm not that old compared to these guys who've been working, real senior guys, but I can remember a time when you had to justify making a long distance phone call, and if you didn't have a reason for it and put in that log, you'd have to have you'd be explaining yourself to the bosses at a police department. So you can see that makes it really difficult to solve things back in the day. And the guys who know that, the older guys that still have an affinity for it, realize those shortcomings, so they're able to get right through them right now. And they always thought maybe something was over in Portland or things like that. And it makes it very easy to do things with a keystroke, which would be a 3-day wait to get a driver's license photo, for example. It will all come surface mail, hard copy delivered to you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, it's almost like, say, the 70s and earlier, everything was considered local. It's like all of your perpetrators are going to be local. Solving a case, looking outside of the immediate surroundings and the people of the neighborhood, let alone or even at most the city. It was pretty rare back then because we didn't travel near as much as we did now. Nowadays it's like people get in the car and they'll relocate and everything's available. Plus perpetrators, especially with the internet, they can identify victims that are hundreds of miles away, and that's just a short day's drive away, and they can be in a totally different place, but they can find victims a lot easier nowadays.
Right. And the traveling serial killers knew this, and this was the golden age of the serial killer. Of course, the DNA took them so much out of commission, but that's what they were able to do, was just slalom between these agencies and these jurisdictions, and they're just gone.
Yeah, and the communication between agencies, I think, is so much better now. We have these databases that everybody's contributing to, and so finding out who put certain DNA up into the database. I mean, that's something that law enforcement agencies can communicate back and forth. So, just it seems to me like the one-to-one cooperation may not be quite there, but like interagency cooperation and understanding and communication, I think is a lot better nowadays, and it's getting better all the time. So, and you have to be, because otherwise a lot of these guys just will continue to get away with things.
Mm-hmm. Right. I'm looking at something from the 1930s right now, and literally, yeah, that was, the way information was passed then was newspaper and police circulars. So amazingly enough, things like True Detective, these sort of lurid pieces that we would know when we were younger on, were very much the police circulars and how information was shared, and the public read these things. So that's actually how. Well, I think it was Dillinger was caught out in Phoenix. I'm sorry, it escapes me at the moment. But yeah, somebody read it and handed it over to the police right there, and they grabbed him up. It could have been Tucson. I'm mistaken on that, but I'm like, you're kidding me. So that was sort of a lost art, and the NCIC supplanted that quite a bit, and the public was removed quite a bit until America's Most Wanted came online. I mean, you can tell I'm a bit of a crime historian too, but I also look at these things for solvability and what were the gaps and the flaws in the system as those things evolved or didn't evolve. And there's an example of something that didn't evolve. It just sort of fell apart, those police circulars. So they're very difficult to get a hold of, but people were very engaged in the gangster film days.
Well, and I also think these conferences, whether they're training conferences, homicide investigator associations, things like that, just best practices, all of those kind of things, rather than only learning from the senior detectives in your agency, you can learn from experts, not only in person, but geez, there's so much information online and books and stuff like what you're doing. I mean, it's just phenomenal. So for all of those that want to get into law enforcement and are interested in helping solve crimes, and most importantly helping victims get the justice that they deserve, then it's to me the amount of information that you can consume out there is just there's way more information than you will ever be able to consume.
Yeah. And it's amazing what some of the techs are doing and how they're coming up with creative ways. Like you talked about the shell casings with the MVAC, and they're just inventing ways of making the machine better, lighting systems, everything. They're getting so good at it, and it's inspiring to see other people doing that.
Oh yeah, a manufacturer may develop some kind of a technology that is designed for one thing. And once it's out in the field and in the hands of the people that are using it, they'll find all sorts of creative ways to adapt to it and be able to use strengths of one device and combine it with others. And the ability to solve cases nowadays is just phenomenal. It's fun to watch.
Jumping back a little bit, you asked why I got into this, and I had a thought, and the guys that that really inspired me, that really just they don't sleep. They work these jobs. They know everything about it. They eat, sleep, and live with it is amazing to me, and it was so inspiring to me. So my moment of that was younger on. I was a police explorer in Hollywood, Florida, and I worked across the street in the mall that was there. So I was there that night at the police department when Adam Walsh was kidnapped a few hours earlier, and I remember all the everything what they were doing and how it just came from the kid must have walked off to this was the real thing. It just didn't happen in Hollywood, Florida, and it did. So it just changed me forever when I realized what this really was all about. And in fact, I said my mom was a crime scene tech, and I'm trying to remember if she was in the unit yet or not, but that stayed all these years, the Adam Walsh case and the aftermath of it and everything else, and seeing the little boy's picture and being there that night, seeing the police respond and being out on the searches, and they're working right across the street, knowing that area very well, knowing the Sears, all that stuff. And those guys, I think, experienced that vicarious trauma from seeing the slaughter of these people and what happens with sex assault or murder or anything in between. And it drives them. So I think the police get a bad rap these days. Public generally doesn't understand how much goes into those investigations and what they have to deal with. And it stays with you. I'm working stuff now into retirement, and I knew some people at Hollywood who went to their grave, literally still looking at the Adam Walsh case to make sure it was correct and was accurate.
Yeah. I've had many discussions with people, on the show, different interviews that I've done with, the psychology types that really understand the trauma that people go through as victims families, but also the investigators. And I don't think you can overemphasize how much just emotional, just trauma and investment that these guys put into these cases. And when they don't get solved, it may take years and years and years, decades even, to solve some of these cases. And that wears off. Yeah, and some are never. And that, that destroys a little piece of that investigator too. And which is why suicides are so high, and just PTSD and things like that. Once you actually understand the police, what they go through, and detectives, and everything from seeing a little baby that's been thrown in a dumpster all the way to someone that's been stabbed 100 times. It's being able to still do your job while you're processing that, and especially as a parent, that those kind of things affect you. And for all of the 800,000 law enforcement that are still out there on the job and still working to keep us safe, the sheer fact that those guys don't just walk off the job when they're so underappreciated, and they're going through so much, and yet they continue to do it, to me is just a testament to their character. Yeah. And I'm like, you know what? Yeah, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt every time, because the sheer fact that they're even there, to me, is a huge notch in the cap, man.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, not to sound melodramatic, but when you see the brilliance of a good interview, our theme here, a good interrogation, and the tools these guys have developed, who don't come from, they can come from anywhere. Like I said, military, they can come from blue collar background, anywhere you think of, but they are so good at it, and they just develop that, and they're developed it because they have a passion for it, and it just lives with them. They stay as detectives. And I suppose we were going to speak about interview interrogation. Wouldn't be a bad time to jump in. Good interview is a lot like a good leader. They care. They understand that an interview process is a complex process. The analogy I described both of them is that it's like an organic element that has to constantly be adjusted. And the analogy I use is for getting an engine running. You have to have in that carburetor, in that combustion chamber. That's really where it's very critical in that interview, or that critical part, the critical mass of that investigation, where we either move on because we've exhausted all leads, we get a confession, or we find something forensically. That's where it has to be managed and developed very well. So, with an engine, you got to have fuel, air, spark, and combustion for all that to happen, or the engine doesn't start. So in the same way, you have to have all those things that happen, and it happens from being a good investigator, have the right person in there bonding. It has to be a caring person who cares all about it, very well read, knowledgeable, a bit of a historian. He knows what they're talking about, and that's and they're unrelenting. They're very good investigators, but they're compassionate too.
Thanks for joining us. Your attention today brings us one step closer to exposing and eliminating the evil that brings crime to our communities. Hit subscribe and share this episode. Together, we will bring justice to every victim.